Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Null. I'd like to welcome you once again to an extended version of our Progressive Commentary Hour. In 2 weeks Sunday, we will be doing what will be the most comprehensive, really honest scientific look at the consequences of trusting that all vaccines, individually or collectively, are safe and effective. It has been 5 years making this film. We are making a whole day webinar, so people are not coming to a theater as they normally did, like my last the Corruption of Science earlier this year at the Ethical Culture Center, where we packed the whole venue. No, because a lot of people couldn't get there. So now we're broadcast all over the world. So at noon, 2 weeks from now, and you can go to garysvitamincloset.com, and it'll show you how to sign up for it. And you can call in also. And if you even go to garynull.com, it'll show you how to get there. It's an all-day event. There's a really big documentary, but then I'm going to have individuals there as well, giving you lots of quality information. But today, I'm introducing you to Dr. Paul Marik. You'll hear about his credentials, which are phenomenal in a moment. And also today, Dr. McCullough, two of the people that originated the protocols that helped save people's lives by the thousands at the beginning of COVID. Thank goodness people listened to them and the other brave physicians, but they all had something in common. They were all mainstream orthodox scientists, physicians in good standing, and published authors, highly cited in the National Library of Medicine. And all of them were helping patients at the beginning using ivermectin, vitamin D, sunlight, healthy diets, hormone therapy, and steroid therapy. And because of that, they were punished. All of them were punished. As you will hear from Dr. Paul Marik, he lost his license to practice medicine. Wow. So they can go after anyone, no matter what their background is, no matter how honest they are. And so we're going to explore this today on our program. And now to our... Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Null. To my guest, Dr. Paul Marik. He is the former Distinguished Professor of Internal Medicine and Chair of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine at Eastern Virginia Medical School in Norfolk, Virginia. Dr. Marik has held fellowships in the Canadian Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, the American College of Physicians, and American Board of Physician Nutrition Specialist. He has authored an incredible 400 peer-reviewed journal papers. He's written several book chapters and 4 books on critical care. In 2017, the American College of Physicians awarded Dr. Marik with the National Teacher of the Year Award. And early during the pandemic, Dr. Marik co-founded with Dr. Pierre Corey the Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance with other physicians to develop an effective protocol for treating SARS-2 infections, which included hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, intravenous vitamin C, and others. Due to the targeted efforts to discredit medical physicians and professionals who challenged Dr. Anthony Fauci's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease and other medical authorities, their failed efforts during the pandemic, well, they blamed that on disinformation. They took no responsibility that their protocols were misguided, inefficient, or wrong. However, a small group of physicians, including Dr. Marik, led by, among others, Dr. Marik, was among those who lost all their medical credentials and board memberships because they were having success keeping their patients alive, not waiting, as other doctors were, over 900,000 doctors were waiting to have that successful vaccine or some medicine to go along with the extremely popular, used in almost all hospitals, remdesivir that was promoted by Dr. Anthony Fauci, irrespective of the fact that it had a 54% mortality rate. And so Dr. Marik is the author of Cancer Care, the role of repurposed drugs and metabolic interventions in treating cancer, and recently started a Substack site, paulmarik.substack.com. For more information, you can find it at the flccc.org. I know there are going to be a lot of questions, so we're going to try to anticipate them and cover them. Nice to have you with us.
Yes, thank you, Gary. Good to be back again.
I like to do a little more on the intro to create a large overarching foundation from which you can have a lot of different entry points to share your deep knowledge and your experience on this. But there are three primary areas I'd like you to cover, if you would, please. The first area is, what are the lessons that you can now look back on and say after 6 years, now those of us who believed in the orthodox approach, those of us who believed in the authorities at the CDC, the FDA, Anthony Fauci, the medical journals, we trusted that. We believed it. Most did. That's not the criticism. The criticism is that when you found out that it didn't make sense in some cases what you were being told to tell your patients or how to treat your patients, or the government had come in and said, even though you are trained and board certified, you're well presented, we don't trust you, but we want you to trust us. Fauci, have you actually ever treated a patient? I understand you went from Cornell right into, science medicine, but have you treated patients? We have. And that was just too much to accept, that someone outside of the inner circle of the pharmaceutical companies selecting who's going to be at the FDA, the CDC, the National Institute of Health and Allergies, et cetera. You weren't one of those people in that circle, nor was Pierre Corey and Dr. Cole and others who took a beating. But I don't recall any other time in my lifetime of seeing anyone who had a better idea being attacked and destroyed for it in medicine. I always thought that there was a place, a forum to discuss this in a civil manner. You can disagree, but you're not going to hate the person, want to see the person who you're disagreeing with destroyed. Until COVID. Then anyone, journalist, physician scientist in one, no matter what your background and your credentials, you were fair game. Even on the front page of the New York Times, the disinformation dozen. Trouble is, I went through every one of them and found they had credible information on their side. You wanted to treat a patient early on with what you would have done in any case. No matter what you called the disease, there were medicines that could help in medical interventions that could have made a difference. You were told, everyone was told, stand down. We've got this. I can only imagine the frustration you must have felt. So one part of what I'm interested in is, what was it like for you and the others that you were communicating with to know you had protocols that could save lives, prevent them from getting worse, prevent them from going to hospital, getting intubated and dying, and yet that was all shut down to you? I've seen this my whole career in the complementary and alternative fields. I've seen it with homeopaths, I've seen it with traditional Chinese medicine, and other medical therapies being completely rejected, no matter what their history, no matter how many articles. And I found thousands and thousands of articles on PubMed supporting with quality research that naturopathy, chiropractic, acupuncture would work in different circumstances. Orthodox medicine, out the window. Wikipedia, no good. So now you were being looked at like these people have been looked at for the last 60 years. So that's one thing. Secondly, what are the lessons that if you were to go before the United States Congress today and you said, here's the lessons we've learned, what we did wrong. I'm not here to embarrass people, but I am here to say that when you get it wrong, step aside, because getting it wrong with a brand new vaccine that had never been done before, actually wasn't a vaccine per se. And then you're telling me that I should accept that a vaccine goes into a person's body with a spike protein. It doesn't stay in the delta as you said it would and then dissolve in the next 24, 48 hours. It's still there today in many people. That is causing the most unique cancer we've ever seen, turbo cancers, where you can go from a diagnosis to end stage in a matter of weeks, something we've never seen before. You're telling me that these self-organizing nanolipid particles that we also call large white clots that we'd not seen before, but the morticians did because they couldn't embalm bodies, that somehow that was natural and not to talk about it. Myocarditis, endocarditis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, embolisms, the things were killing young soccer players, young athletes who had no risk factors, dropping dead, and you didn't make that an issue. So here's what we want to share. Here's what we did wrong. Here's the lessons we should have listened and didn't. And finally, what would be some of your suggestions for people who they're just now waking up to this? They've had 2, 3. In fact, I know someone I'm counseling the other day has had 4 vaccines. In addition to having 4 vaccines, she was put on synthetic hormone replacement therapy, not for 2 weeks, to help her with our hot flashes. 22 years every day. Wow. And we know the side effects of that is a 13% increase in heart attacks, strokes, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, colorectal cancer, and dementia. And now they've added, just recently, autoimmune conditions. So if you could give us an idea of how to help people who say, I don't know what to do. No, I don't, my doctors, no one's willing to say that there's a problem. And now you're telling me that everything they told me isn't true. Now I got spike proteins producing spike proteins. And that's going through my blood-brain barrier, my ovaries, my testes. Wow. None of this were we warned about. So if you could tell us what lessons we learned, the bad news, how that impacted you and all the others that were fighting out there on behalf of good medicine and were being discredited, even though now it's shown that you were right, you saved lives. And now, what can we do to get started? The forum is yours.
So yes, those are good questions. So if you remember, the NIH, the FDA, the WHO, everybody said there's no treatment for this disease, which we called COVID. And Anthony Fauci said, well, you stay at home till you go blue, and then when you can't breathe and you go blue, you go to the hospital and we'll give you remdesivir. So from the outset, we knew that was nonsense. You know, as clinicians, you may not have the best treatment or the most novel treatment, but you're not going to not treat a patient. So right at the beginning, we're talking about beginning of March 2020, we developed protocols for the treatment of COVID. I mean, that's what you do. You analyze the disease, you look at the disease, and we developed first an in-hospital protocol, which included steroids, and we were severely reprimanded and chastised by everyone for using steroids in a viral disease. They thought we were insane. But then, of course, 7 months later, a randomized trial out of the UK came out showing steroids were life-saving. And for our patients, we developed protocols which included ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. And again, we were laughed at and mocked. And obviously, it intensified. There was enormous pressure on us not to do what we were doing. We were reprimanded. We were called misinformationists. And it obviously progressed to the point that I lost my hospital privileges. I lost my license. And ultimately, the American Board of Internal Medicine considered Pierre, Corey, and myself to be spreading misinformation and to be dangerous to the American population. And we had all of our boards removed. The reality is that everything they told us was a lie. And this is all verifiable. So, you know, we were correct. Not that we're so smart, but it was obvious. And what happened, and this is the big lesson, you can't censor science. Scientists and clinicians have to be able to talk and communicate with each other. That's been science through, you know, forever. And we may not agree, but at least we can have a conversation and discuss things. But if you went against what Anthony Fauci had to say, you were considered a misinformationist, and everything that was done possible to silence you. So I think the first big lesson is you can't censor science. You have to let scientists communicate with each other That's how we develop new treatments. That's how we're not always right, but we're prepared to admit it. We've learned something. So you can never censor science. Secondly, you can never have a closed mind. When you have a disease which is, impacted so many millions of people and so many people died, you have to try novel therapies. The idea is to have a randomized controlled trial for every single intervention, which is so nonsense because, medicine is based on observation. You observe certain things and then you treat patients based on those observations, not a randomized controlled trial. What's controlled about the trial is the pharmaceutical companies control the outcome. That's what's controlled about it. So that's the second point is you do not need randomized controlled trials to treat patients with FDA approved drugs. It's not like we were using experimental drugs. We were using drugs that were FDA approved. They were being used off label. 40 to 50% of drugs Americans receive are off label. Off label was fine pre-COVID. It was standard of care, happened all the time. In pediatric patients, up to 60%. But suddenly, when COVID came around, it became unacceptable, illegal to prescribe off label drugs, and doctors lost their license. They had their licenses revoked because they used an FDA-approved drug off-label. So I think there are many lessons to be learned. I think the first thing, the most outstanding thing, and there's still people who have their eyes completely closed and their brains closed. We have a completely broken healthcare system. We have a healthcare system that is not designed or does not generate health. It is basically a disease-producing system that enriches the pharmaceutical companies and their backers and the industrial complex. It has nothing to do with promoting health, improving health. It's obvious to be seen. That is what their goal is. I think Kennedy is trying to change that, but our current system is completely broken. And God help you if you get sick, because the most dangerous place, I'm saying this as an intensive care doctor, it breaks my heart. The most dangerous place for a sick patient is the hospital, because they will kill you. And that is a terrible thing to say. So my advice to patients is keep healthy. Do what you can do to promote your own health. Make some very important lifestyle changes. Take matters into your own hands and try avoid going to the hospital. Now, there are people who think I'm talking nonsense, but I think these people have been so brainwashed, by watching mainstream TV, mainstream news media. They don't recognize the way they've been brainwashed. So what they have to do is try and open their eyes, look at the other side of the argument. Even if you don't believe it, just open your eyes and have a look what's happening. Unfortunately, 60 to 70% of Americans have their eyes completely closed and have no idea what has happened. And maybe I'll just quote one study to you from the Cleveland Clinic. Most people would agree that's a reputable medical institution. What they found is that the more vaccines you got, you have a shot and then you have a booster and a booster, that the more boosters you got, the greater your chance of getting COVID. Let me say that again. The more shots you got and the more boosters you got, it increased your risk of getting COVID. So the disease they were trying to prevent with the vaccine was actually causing the disease. That was published by the Cleveland Clinic. That just gives you an example of how unsafe and how ineffective this so-called vaccine was. It wasn't really a vaccine, as you said. It was a genetic therapy with long-term complications. And people must wake up to this, that they were injected with genetic material which has potentially long-term consequences. We know, although they deny it, that the vaccine increases your risk of cancer. There are now multiple studies that have demonstrated this. And part of the problem is because the genetic material of the vaccine gets incorporated into our own genetic material. Can you imagine something so scary? We are changing the genetic makeup and the genome of the human body with this so-called vaccine, and no one is telling the truth. So those are a few lessons. It's horrific. If you were to read this, you would think this is science fiction. It could never have happened.
Because you've dealt with thousands of patients in emergency care, we saw early on people going in who were COVID positive but didn't have major symptoms, and they were frequently intubated. And a pulmonologist at the time says, we shouldn't be intubating all these people. And yet they were. Other times, we've had nurses say people were isolated in a room with no food or water. Nurses were afraid to go in and take care of them. So they were in their own, they soiled themselves. One woman was in one room with only 14 ounces of water in like 7 or 8 days. And our body should be around 72% water. She was totally dehydrated. Well, when you're that dehydrated, you put your whole health at risk. And the nurses knew it, and the hospitals knew it. But everything, if a person died of a heart attack, it was listed COVID. But explain some of the things you witnessed or you heard about that was going on in hospitals that were simply wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the whole system broke down. I think the worst thing was patients were isolated. They were not allowed to see their families. They were not allowed to see their relatives. And so patients died all alone. I think that's the most cruel punishment you can inflict on a family and on a patient. They died alone. The whole thing was completely and utterly absurd, the way they were isolated. This wasn't Ebola. We were forced to wear masks. We know don't work. And most of the precautions they took didn't work. And as you said, patients were treated like they were convicts. They were prisoners. They were being imprisoned in the hospital. It's an outrageous thing. And they were deprived of social contact. How we could have done that, I have no idea. Um, Patients need the support of their family. The family plays a core and critical part in their recovery. We knew that before and we know that now, but they were denied access to the patient. Patients couldn't communicate their wishes, so often they were intubated and all kinds of interventions against their will. And then, of course, patients were given remdesivir, often against their will. And this is a drug which they tried for Ebola and it was abandoned because it was killing patients. And so we know it actually increases your risk of death. So patients were in hospital and they were forced by the federal government and the healthcare system to get a drug which increases the risk of death. I mean, it's just too preposterous. So the hospital became a very dangerous place for sick people. That's why we did whatever we could to treat them, not let them go to hospital, because you're right, they intubated them too quickly. Intubation is not a treatment for any disease. It buys you time. But unfortunately, these patients were intubated very early and then isolated in the ICU. So it was if someone came from a different planet and landed in the ICU, they would want to know what that person had done. What was his crime? What crime had he committed to be punished in such a manner? It was truly demoralizing and dehumanizing.
Brad, give us, if you would, some of the things you've learned since that would help a person stay healthy, even if they were around a person that was shedding. Let's say they didn't get the vaccine, but their partner did. So you want to protect yourself as best you can. And how would you go about stimulating their immune system, get a good, strong immune response? No matter what disease you're faced with, a strong immune system can make a difference.
Yeah, so you ask a really good question because in this country, about 80% of people are metabolically unhealthy. So the first thing we should have done, and the first thing we knew about, was vitamin D. We knew this. Vitamin D is so important for the immune system. the immune cells have receptors for vitamin D. It's absolutely important for an intact immune system. And the data shows quite clearly if your vitamin D level was above 50, your chances of dying from SARS-CoV-2 was zero, absolutely zero. And most people who were affected were elderly people who are indoors, don't get sun, had exceedingly low vitamin D levels. So if the public health authorities had done their job, which they should have done, what they should have done is given vitamin D to every single person, but particularly the elderly people who were, inbound in institutions. Vitamin D is absolutely critical for your immune system. And that's the first thing. Second thing we know is most Americans eat 80% of their diet is highly processed food. We know this causes insulin resistance and the metabolic syndrome, which causes all kinds of bad outcomes. So Americans have to start eating real food and, much like the new food pyramid. So they did a very good job, this new administration, in turning the food pyramid upside down. You want to eat real food. If it looks like food, it's food. If it comes in a box, has a wrapper, has all kinds of labels, that's not food. That's processed, boxed food. So what you can do is simple. Get vitamin D. I think every single person, unless they spend all their day in the sun, needs vitamin D. It's very important. You need a healthy diet. It doesn't sound, we're not talking about expensive food. We're talking about just regular food. Then obviously sleep and exercise. If people did just the basic lifestyle changes, we would have cut the mortality from COVID, and we would reduce the risk of people getting Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, cancer. All these chronic diseases are related to bad American lifestyle. So it's not a difficult thing to do. And it's inexpensive. We're not paying a lot of money. In fact, you're saving money because you're eating less but healthy food.
At the Wuhan hospital, the very first patients coming in, they were giving them vitamin C drips, 24,000 milligrams. And from what I was reading, with very good results. We didn't give any vitamin C drips. We didn't even mention zinc and vitamin D and vitamin A, beta carotene, the nutrients we know, support a good, healthy immune system. What role do you see vitamin C, including vitamin C drips, playing for a person who is infected?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And you may not know this, but we developed the MAF protocol, which started right at the beginning. And M was for methylprednisolone, A was for ascorbic acid. So we were using IV vitamin C right at the beginning because we knew that these patients were vitamin C deficient, and vitamin C is an important stress hormone, an important immune modulator. We actually wrote a paper on this, but it was retracted. Our paper was retracted because they didn't like what we wrote. Can you believe it? So they were really going after us. So, we knew what to do because, we were clinicians at the bedside. And clinicians at the bedside know what to do, unlike administrators who don't know. So I agree with you. Vitamin C was really important.
And just getting people outside, fresh air, walking, biking, they prevented all that. They actually arrested a guy who was kayaking alone in San Francisco Bay.
Yeah. So interesting fact that people don't know that the single most important intervention in the 1918 influenza outbreak was sunshine. They found that hospitalized patients who they put outdoors in the sun had a significantly reduced mortality, and they attributed to sunshine. Can you imagine such a thing? And yet, what do? We keep patients indoors, inbound. They can't go outside. Sunshine, just getting back to basics. Some fresh air, some sunshine, some good nutrition. That's all you need. And so that's what we try to do to prevent people getting into the hospital.
I only have two last questions. One is, what about people who are shedding? Because they didn't talk about shedding at the beginning, but I ended up having people come to me who didn't get vaccinated, were healthy. One nurse in particular, her husband was a physician, and she ended up having an inflammation of her breast on Sunday. And I said, your husband examined? Yeah. He didn't know what to make of it. I said, why don't you go to the hospital? Have it thoroughly tested. She had the beginning cancer. On Friday, she had stage 4 cancer of the breast. Her husband didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do. And I gave her a protocol, and thank goodness, after 4 months, she was cancer-free. But what about all the other people who think they're safe because they didn't get the vaccine, but they're close to people who did and that could shed? What would you suggest for them?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So firstly, the authorities think shedding doesn't happen, and they're wrong. There is now a peer-reviewed paper showing that shedding actually happens, and that so what happens is that people who've recently been vaccinated, they form liposomes in their lungs, and they exhale these liposomal particles with spike protein, which people inhale. So you can actually develop a spike-related disease just from being in a close contact with someone who's been recently vaccinated. And this does not have to be, intimate contact or direct physical contact. It's just in the neighborhood. And basically, you develop a disease very similar to that of a vaccine injured person. And unfortunately, the makers of the vaccine, they were very smart in making this very powerful bioweapon, but they didn't come up with an antidote. So that was, they didn't, the idea was to cause as much harm and decimation as they can. So they invented this, and we know it's a man-made thing, the spike protein. It was man-made in a lab. We don't have a good antidote for it. Even today, there are many things that we try and do. One of them being ivermectin actually binds the spike protein. We don't have a good antidote for this man-made bioweapon. So it is a big dilemma.
When I get on an airplane, I spray colloidal silver in both nostrils 5 times, hold a tissue, so it resolves the bacterial or viral infection in the nose. I wear sunglasses, then I wear a shield that goes over the entire face, so no large particulate matter can hit me. And I put gloves on, a hat on, and I take some garlic, I take black cumin seed oil, curcumin, I take some nattokinase, and some resveratrol, vitamin C, quercetin prior. So I'm on that plane, and I've just supercharged my immune system, and I protect it with barriers. I look around, I'm the only person on the plane with any barriers. And people don't change their clothes at home because the airplanes don't go through and sanitize the seats. I take all my clothes home, and as a result, even traveling hundreds of thousands of miles during COVID, never got sick. But and I also suggest that we should be looking at oxygen therapy, just a simple oxygen machine where you can breathe in 100% oxygen, because oxygen is extremely beneficial, and no one's told to do that.
So you mentioned, the nasal spray, which was something we recommended right at the beginning. I mean, it's such an obvious thing. You inhale the virus and the virus replicates in your nasopharynx. So one of the most effective ways of killing the virus is to use a virucidal nasal spray. So there are many different things you can use. One of the more popular ones was povidone iodine. And there were studies that showed, so there was a study in people who had a fear of going to hospital. Imagine such a study. And they gave half of them povidone iodine nasal spray, and it showed that it reduced the risk of being admitted to hospital by like 80%. It's very effective. And so what I do is, when in the height of the pandemic, I would when I went out, I would take the spray with me if I had to go to a conference or convention and just spray it in my nose. It's a very effective way of killing the virus. And you can do the same thing for influenza, is kill it locally. It's a very effective way of getting rid of the virus.
Final question for you. What did this teach you as a human being who had lived in a environment of people respecting because of your long, distinguished work of being right, saving lives, and suddenly you're cast as the heretic? How did that impact you on a personal level?
Yeah, so it obviously still impacts on me because obviously I had practiced medicine for 30, 35 years and my credentials were removed and I couldn't practice medicine. And I can't even act as an expert witness because I've been labeled a misinformationist, and so no one will believe or trust anything that I say. So it's been devastating. I spent my entire career studying medicine and practicing medicine. It's what I love to do, and it was taken away from me, which is it's such in itself that's a crime. And I'm not alone. There are many doctors whose careers were ended just because they dared to challenge what was the truth. Has devastating consequences.
Are you able to recover now? Can you earn a living now?
So, no, I can't practice medicine. I don't have a license, and the American board considers me a misinformationist. So I can't even testify as an expert witness because I'm considered an unreliable person. So I can do stuff at home, but I can't see patients.
What about the group for people watching this right now who were vaccinated and didn't have the problems but may? There's a group that they can contact. Can you tell us briefly about the group of physicians?
Yeah, so I think, they should maybe go to the FLCCC, which has changed its name. It's now IMA. So there's an attempt because, as you said, once you're vaccinated, we don't know how long the spike protein circulates. There's some data that it may circulate forever in some people. So really what people need, what the federal government needs to make available in the NIH is we should be able, it is not difficult to do. They're doing this now in Germany. You get a sample of blood. You can even do it with a prick, just a finger prick blood, and just test if the person has spike protein in their blood. That's what we need to do. And then we can then sort out which patients we need to try and treat. I think that's the most vital thing that we can do. This test will be coming to the US at some point.
What is the name of the group, please?
So, I would go to the Independent Medical Alliance, IMA. It has a website, which is ima.health.org. And I think they will find information relevant to COVID, long COVID, the vaccine.
Good. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the good work. I appreciate the sacrifice you have made, and we appreciate you being on the program today.
Well, thank you, and thank you for understanding, because most journalists don't get it, and many people don't get what has been one of the worst crimes of humanity.
I did a documentary called Death by Medicine. I did a book called Death by Medicine. I only used medical organizations' own data to show that, unlike the AMA that said it was the third leading cause of death and injury, I found it to be the number one cause. They didn't include infections that people die from when they go home. They didn't include bed sores and gangrene infections cause people to die. They didn't include malnutrition developed in the hospital. When you had all those extra things together, yeah, you are right. A hospital is not the place to be unless it's an absolute dire emergency.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. Have a good day.
And if you appreciate the information shared, please share it with other people. That was Dr. Paul Marik, M-A-R-I-K. And again, outstanding physician, phenomenal credentials, and was American Board of Physician Nutritional Specialist, and also 400 peer-reviewed published articles. And in 2017, the American College of Physicians awarded Paul with the National Teacher of the Year. Then they turned right around, not because he did anything wrong, but because he asked the wrong questions. He wasn't going to be obedient and allow his patients to die. So, we're happy to have him on, and Dr. McCullough as well. His Substack is paulmarik.substack.com. For more information, you can also contact flcc.com. And now to our guest, Dr. Peter McCullough. He is an internist, a cardiologist, an epidemiologist, and a former professor of medicine at a couple of Texas University medical schools. He's regarded as one of the world's top experts on COVID-19 and the adverse effects from the COVID vaccines. Currently, Dr. McCullough is the Chief Science Officer of the Wellness Company, which develops natural products for a variety of conditions, including the reversal of COVID vaccine side effects and the symptoms from long COVID infections. He's published dozens of peer-reviewed papers on SARS-2 infection and vaccines. He's reviewed thousands of reports, and he's published an additional 700 papers and studies. Peter has testified on the pandemic response before the U.S. Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. And before that, he testified at the state government bodies in Texas, Colorado, and New Hampshire. He is the co-author of The Courage to Face COVID-19, Preventing Hospitalization and Death While Battling the Biopharmaceutical Complex, which, by the way, banned his work on Amazon for challenging the official COVID narrative. He hosts a very active blog site on Substack that posts articles almost daily at Peter McCullough, that's McCulloughh, MD, at .substack.com. That's Peter McCullough, MD.substack.com. And the Wellness Company's website is twc.health. Nice to have you with us today.
Well, thank you.
I'm going to give you just one overarching question, which I know that you'll be more than capable of filling in. We've now had all these years post the COVID pandemic, the vaccine, the hospitalizations. If you were now to stand before Congress and say, here is what we now know. Some of us knew then, but now the full truth has come out. For example, what information were we given with certainty that proves not to be correct? Whether good-intentioned individuals gave us wrong information or individuals who did not have good intentions gave us wrong information, neither accommodates the idea that people died, people were permanently injured, people were injured but recovered, and there are people still who've had the vaccines, and many of them have had 4 or 5 vaccines, who don't know if they're going to have a type of cancer or a type of blood clot or embolism. They're very concerned. So we want to address all of this. First, our issue is, what can we say with some certainty and confidence, based upon good science and clinical experience, were the mistakes made, the misinformation, the out-and-out nonsense of some of their recommendations, yet all of that was protected. If you criticized anything, it's if Fauci said, criticize me, you're criticizing science. I represent science. Really? Well, then let's take an honest look at the mistakes made. That would be my first area I'd like you to go into in depth. The forum is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Null. It's an honor to be on your program. You know, we've watched the first Trump administration, Trump 1.0, then the Biden administration, now the second Trump administration, 2.0. None of those 3 administrations have ever asked the questions that you just asked. What have we learned from this pandemic? What are the lessons learned? How can we do better? How can we care for those who are still suffering? The administrations have turned a blind eye to all of this. It never comes up in their agendas for what's going on in the United States. And it's interesting, it's not in the agendas of any bodies of governance anywhere in the world. So what we know now is that 90% of us contracted SARS-CoV-2 infection, the virus, as shown here, which emanated out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It was a human beta coronavirus with the spike protein on the surface, engineered in that lab deliberately to invade human respiratory pneumocytes, invade the lungs, and then make some individuals very sick. The spike protein causes blood clots. It causes heart damage, causes stroke and neurologic damage, neuropathies, causes autoimmune syndromes because the spike protein is not supposed to be there. And then sadly, it looks like the spike protein lowers our defenses against cancer. So what's the problem? The spike protein stays in the body after infection for very long periods of time, years, and then it's superloaded into the body with COVID-19 vaccines. So we have a problem of spike protein toxicity in humans all over the world. 90% of people contracted SARS-CoV-2 worldwide. 2/3 of people took a COVID vaccine, one or more. The United States is 81%. So I would submit to you that human health should be examined now. Every single aspect of human health should be examined, stratified based on exposure to the virus as well as COVID-19 vaccines.
Something that I have not heard anyone discuss, and that is we were told and still believe that there was just one major laboratory. Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina did a lot of the original work, but then that was also transferred and shared with the Chinese laboratory, of which there were actually two divisions. We never talk about the defense area where they had 99 PhD scientists, virologists, working on the weaponization. That's never discussed, yet it was reality. But just where they were doing the research, as if somehow it was innocent research. I've come to realize that there were hundreds of these laboratories around the world. And why couldn't we be honest and say that these were not gain of function? Because people don't know what that means. You could say, well, we were afraid something could happen and we wouldn't be able to defend ourselves, so we made a vaccine in preparation for that. That's nonsense. More likely is these were biolabs doing biological research to weaponize, to make toxic a vaccine. And now what about all the other laboratories that the Anthony Fauci's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease were funding? Mm-hmm. No one's asking that question when we was, maybe they didn't know. Could you tell us what you know about other forms of research where the end goal is in secret, with our money, they've been doing work to make something that could actually harm people, like the COVID vaccine? Could you address that, please?
The Biden administration, in a sense, made this open. And in May of 2024, they published guidance for biolabs that are developing pathogens of pandemic potential that have a dual purpose. And it's memorialized in the legislation where the pathogens can be a virus, a bacteria, a fungi, it could be some other form of a toxic substance. And the dual purpose is it can get the whole world sick, and it could be used to come up with a remedy, a vaccine, a therapeutic, a particular protective device. So this research is richly funded. Even though President Trump tried to shut down research for it, the foundations are richly funding it, like Gates Foundation and Wellcome Trust and Rockefeller Foundation, Chinese Communist Party richly funding this. This is the new kind of military, what we call biopharmaceutical complex now. The labs and the individuals and the countries that hold the next global threat, and they hold a potential remedy or solution like a vaccine, they hold power. And as you alluded to, there are hundreds of these biolabs all over the world. At the McCullough Foundation, we've published extensively on this on our Substack, Focal Points. There are dozens of these. Of the BSL level 4, the most dangerous labs known, there's over 12 of those. One is in Galveston, Texas. And it was working with SARS-CoV-1. And as you point out, multiple labs collaborated on the creation of SARS-CoV-2. So you have the Ralph Baric lab at UNC Chapel Hill, who outsourced his ideas via Anthony Fauci and Peter Daszak at the EcoHealth Alliance to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Daszak helps coordinate the experiments with the bat lady, Dr. Xingling Li. Publishes this in the open 2015 and 2016 in Nature Medicine and precedes the National Academy of Sciences. But then a nearly identical virus was being experimented upon in the Rocky Mountain Research Laboratory for the NIH in Hamilton, Montana, where they were trying to get this virus to invade Egyptian fruit bats. So this has been well chronicled by multiple authors, Jim Haslam being one. I believe Peter Breggin, in his book early on, COVID-19 and the Global Predators, We Are the Prey. It's accounted for in my book, Courage to Face COVID-19, and now Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. The world of vaccinology, Dr. Null, has entered the bioweapons era now. It's a whole new era, and it's richly funded. We have government agencies dedicated to this. There's a NIH agency, BARDA, and another one in the military, DARPA. And I think it's in the open. You know, DARPA in 2012, on their website had a brand new program they announced. It was called the ADEPT P3 program, still on their website. It said they aspire to end pandemics in 60 days using messenger RNA vaccines. So when the COVID-19 vaccines rolled out, anybody could have went to DARPA and found that webpage. Sadly, I found it pretty late. But I think the Trump administration should have been honest with everyone to begin with and said, listen, we've had aspirations of doing this for nearly 10 years.
When we see something happening as in California, where it's a highly infectious pathogen, and we hear about how many people are infected, what we don't hear is the CDC saying, here's what they're infected with, here's where it comes from, because they're saying at this moment, they don't know where it comes from. Mm-hmm. Could this not be another example, even, and I'll use this without proof, I'm just speculating, if China wanted to put something within our community that could adversely affect us, biological agent would be very easy. And also, a few years ago, there was a situation where a person from China went into a graduate student, I think a graduate doctorate, and was found to have certain highly pathogenic, never before seen, I think it was a yeast or molds of some kind, and they had all this information on it. What could they be doing except to try to use that as a biological weapon somewhere in the United States for whatever their purposes? But now that you have Iran and you have China and Russia, all of whom are using this work, why should we not pay attention to this? Why should we not ban it? Period. And
there should be a global
do we
ban.
Know do we know what's going on with this pathogen in California?
No, we don't. But look at our assiduousness with respect to Iran developing nuclear capabilities, whether they be for deterrence or for offense. We should have the same interest in banning the development of biological weapons. We've already had one that got the entire world sick. And the McCullough Foundation looked at this bird flu outbreak that started in 2021, and we traced the origins of it to gain-of-function research done at the USDA Poultry Research Lab in Athens, Georgia. We published a paper in the journal Wildlife and Poultry Sciences demonstrating that. The USDA never refuted it. And so through serial passage methods, that's how bird flu began to pass between migratory ducks and mammals. Got all the farms infected, and it drove up the price of eggs. It was all a misadventure done in a biolab. So anytime we see a new pathogen or something suspicious, the very first thing we should ask is, did it come out of a biolab? And recently, McCullough Foundation, we asked that question about the meningitis outbreak in the United Kingdom at Kent University, Canterbury. That's the very first question we asked is, where are the deadly samples of Neisseria meningitidis in the UK, and we traced him to Bristol in the UK, and had a series of rapid communications out on this. We have to be ahead of the curve. In Ridley, California, a secret biolab was discovered that was financed by the Chinese Communist Party. A recent one was found in a neighborhood in Las Vegas. So I agree with you. We should be vigilant and immediately suspicious about any announcement from government agencies. Remember, the CDC and the NIH were part of the conspiracy to cover up the origins of SARS-CoV-2. They weren't honest with us. They didn't tell us that this came out of the Chinese lab, yet all along they knew.
I don't know how deep you go into this, but please take us there. It's one thing to determine that this was a human-created biological weapon. That's bad enough unto itself, and that's a crime against humanity, because they have had proof for decades that viruses and bacteria and different types of pathogens escape into the environment. Fortunately, not at a pandemic level, but there's no such thing as a 100% safe lab. Mm-hmm. And especially the labs in Ukraine, like 12 or more labs in Ukraine with this war going on, and they've been bombed. This is insane. But what about how far back can we show that they were making this virus, had patents on the virus, mm-hmm. and had an article published by one of the Chinese scientists who, by the way, after he published an article in a peer-reviewed journal in Chinese, then committed suicide and jumped off the Wuhan building. That's something I knew about it happening. I didn't know why. But think of all the effort that would have gone in on the part of many different people who knew the truth, especially the CDC, which has investments in vaccines, holds co-patents on vaccines, is sponsored. Their money comes from vaccine makers, and yet they never once have they taken the direction of, let's see what the real cause of this is. Could you address the history of its development?
Well, for coronaviruses, we can just trace the career of Ralph Baric, probably the most expert person in the world in coronaviruses. He was publishing on these in the 1990s. In fact, he published a paper in a journal that I was a senior associate editor for, and that was the American Journal of Cardiology in the late 1990s, about coronaviruses given in high concentrations damaging the heart and causing heart failure. So this goes back a long way. I think the Bioweapons Act of 2004 memorialized that the government was getting in this disastrous field of inquiry. And then in 2005, the PrEP Act, which said we will have a biological pandemic. We will have pandemics, and when this happens, the government will be running the show with government-issued countermeasures, and everything will be immune from liability. And that's exactly what we saw. Companies saw a ton of money in this. Stefan Bainzel, who was a pharmaceutical representative in Europe, and then he became a district manager in Belgium, he became the CEO of BioMérieux. This is astonishing. He went from being someone with no executive capabilities at all to being the CEO of BioMérieux. And under Jacques Chirac, guess what contract that BioMérieux got? They got the contract to build the biosecurity level 4 annex to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So Stefan Bainzel knew about Wuhan very early in his career, very early. And then a few years later, he jumps from being CEO of BioMérieux, which is a huge company, to being the CEO of a one-person company in Cambridge, Massachusetts called Moderna. Moderna had no income whatsoever until they got government contracts to start to develop government vaccines. And one of the first ones they started to work on was a coronavirus vaccine. So Moderna holds patents on a coronavirus vaccine that date back to 2016. And in communications between Moderna and Dr. Ralph Baric at the UNC Chapel Hill, In one of them, there's a material transfer agreement where they're asking Marik for his virus so they can test out their vaccine against it. I mean, this is in 2019. And the National Institutes of Health co-owns the patent on Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine. So the government collusion here, the involvement of academic medicine, the unprecedented flows of money, the wide open corruption, and the harm to human populations, in a sense, is a terrible, nefarious story of all time.
There's another part of this story that I do not want it to be hidden from the public. What happened to you and to a handful of other individuals, probably in the neighborhood of about 50 to 100 people, who saw that as physicians, their first responsibility was use whatever knowledge they had, whatever tools they had available, including repurposed drugs that were approved by the FDA, to help people instead of waiting until we were told you don't do anything, you stay at home until you turn blue, then go to emergency room, be intubated. I interviewed pulmonologists, says what we're doing is wrong. This is not medically sound advice. We're actually speeding up the death process. Nurses frequently would not go into a room and either feed or give water to patients for days on end. One patient didn't have any water given, though she was asking for water for 4 days. And it was everything was being done wrong. No one was criticized. No one's been held accountable. But then there was this, where the New York Times on its front page condemned 12 individuals, what they called the disinformation dozen. And then that became, as the record of the paper of record, fair game. Everyone else took the New York Times and then started to go after each one of those 12 people. What was it like being one of the leaders saving lives, you and others at the beginning, against all the things that we were told couldn't happen? You saved lives. They said, no, there's nothing going to save you until we get you in the hospital and give you remdesivir. Tell us about that part of your life, because you were a major player within the established medical community, scientific community, and now you were a pariah, you and other people like Pierre Corey, et cetera, and Dr. Cole, who lost his pathology business. Tell us that part, please.
Prior to the pandemic, I was a full professor of medicine. I held major leadership positions at several institutions. I was the most published person in my field in the world and history, lectured widely, advised the FDA, had been at the FDA advisory committees, European Medicine Agency, New York Academy of Sciences, editor of my own textbook, published in New England Journal of Medicine and Lancet and JAMA and all the best journals. And when I saw the pandemic hit, I saw the clinical and academic opportunity of a lifetime. The people in the research groups that could figure out how to treat the illness were going to make a huge impact. And that's what I set out to do. The McCullough Protocol was conceived and fully published in the American Journal of Medicine in early August of 2020. It was the most frequently cited paper in the entire pandemic. Well, McCullough Protocol, which envisioned using multiple available drugs and nutraceuticals and other products in a organized risk stratified protocol, was widely adopted by the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons in October of 2020. It's been credited with saving tens of millions of lives and sparing hundreds of millions of hospitalizations because it was so flexible. It didn't rely on a single drug. It relied on concepts and the application of a multi-agent approach in high-risk people on day one to avoid two bad outcomes: hospitalization and death. And as you pointed out, the government protocol and the protocol adopted by all the major medical centers was to do nothing for this illness and allow people to become hospitalized. And sadly, almost all the deaths occurred in the hospital. So I looked at it as an opportunity of a lifetime and I grabbed it. I'm not an infectious disease doctor. I'm not a virologist, but I am now after years of study, and I've treated so many patients face to face and handled every permutation of this. multiple U.S. Senate testimonies. I testified in the House of Representatives, advised governments all over the world. So I am telling you, this was a tremendous capstone to my career. What was shocking to me was the response. And the response, the first time I testified in the U.S. Senate, November 19th, 2020, there was already a pre-written editorial that came out the next day in the New York Times calling me a snake oil salesman. Can you imagine that? A snake oil salesman for a peer-reviewed study, a peer-reviewed protocol in a highly respected medical journal. It was astounding what was going on. And what we learned, what was behind all of that defamation was a drive to only offer one thing to the public, and that is repeated mass genetic vaccination. All forms of early treatment, affordable nutraceuticals and generics, and expensive high-tech biologics, all forms of early treatment were suppressed, and the only thing that was promoted by academia and government agencies was mass vaccination.
Final question. Could you give us an understanding of what you see can be done at this point, since they're still promoting the vaccine, still promoting it for pregnant women, still promoting it for young people, in spite of all the articles that have been retracted? And that's something else. I did some research and found out that more articles that were supporting the COVID protocols have been retracted than all other scientific articles retracted in the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. If they were confident that what they were publishing was accurate, they wouldn't. And these are retractions that the authors, what are they afraid of? And now we have how many more articles? Around 3,500 that I'm aware of, that show what was wrong with the protocols and what should be done right. And yet there's been no irony of, gee whiz, we did it all wrong, and now we're doing it right. Let's learn a lesson. Nothing.
Well, we should blame the successive administrations. So the first person to blame is President Trump, and then Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They are really responsible now. They're holding the keys to this entire, epic of the pandemic. We should do a deep dive and review what happened. What can be done now, and the wellness company is in the lead, is detoxification, to get this spike protein out of our bodies. And the product that we've assembled is called the Ultimate Spike Detox, and that is the combination of nattokinase, bromelain, and curcumin, and 4 minor ingredients given on an empty stomach. These are medicinal grade, high dose products for over a year, and we can see evidence of the spike protein levels coming down in the human body, people getting better. I've treated thousands of patients, multiple peer-reviewed publications. It's perfect for a large randomized prospective double-blind trial by the U.S. government. We're talking 20,000 patients in each arm, long COVID vaccine injury syndromes, well-characterized versus placebo. This would probably be $50 to $100 million project. Now, these agencies are spending to the tune of billions of dollars on wasted ideas, including more vaccines and just ridiculous approaches to the pandemic and to the future pandemics. So, at this point in time, Dr. Null, I think America will turn to the wellness company. They'll turn to doctors like you and me that are coming up with solutions, and they're not going to bother with Trump or Robert F. Kennedy if it happens on their watch.
Well said. By the way, who can forget the big announcement about Make America Healthy Again, and they're eating hamburgers and drinking cola? Right? You saw that?
It's a political slogan. It didn't have any meaning behind it. And look what's happened now. I mean, everything Kennedy has even tried to do has been reversed. He never had the courage to call, medical center leaders to Washington and review the data. And if I was in his position, I would have pulled the vaccines off the market day one. I would have rescinded the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, get all the vaccine and pharmaceutical advertisements off TV, and then I would have held a series of mandatory meetings, because these centers all receive government money, mandatory meetings, and we would have gone through the COVID-19, pandemic debacle, all the aspects of the response and the vaccines. We would have done childhood vaccines by this time and the autism epidemic, food dyes, water quality. I mean, there could be so much could be done. Instead, we've ended up with a political slogan and nothing's been done. America's been now distracted with all different types of geopolitical issues. And the reality is, I still have patients coming in my office sick from the spike protein.
Well, there's not enough praise I could give you for the amount of people you've saved, the courage you've exhibited, the strength of being a phoenix and rising from all the criticism, rising above those people who do not have 1/10 the insight or integrity that you have. You're a doctor's doctor. And Anthony Fauci is not a doctor of anything except deception. Thank you very much for being with us today. I appreciate it. Before you go today, I'm sure many of you would like to spend a whole day learning a tremendous amount of good information from the greatest minds around the world, dozens of them. It's taken 5 years to produce, direct, and write, narrate this documentary. And it questions the science behind the safety and efficacy of vaccines. They give us their word, it's safe and effective. One or a dozen together, doesn't matter. Have they done the actual research? No, they have not. Then we're believing in someone's ego, we're believing in agendas sponsored by Big Pharma, and that's unfortunate. So if you'd like to join me, of the dozens of webinars I've done, this is an important one. This could save your life. This is information you're not going to find in one place, all that I'm sharing. Call 877-627-5065. 877-627-5065. That way you can sign up and join us for terrific information. It's riveting. And I'm dividing it up. So we start at noon and I introduce it, and then we go for 2 hours. Then we take a break. Have plenty of time, get something to eat, restroom break, exercise a little bit. And then we come back and we have a panel of the finest minds we could find in the world on what to do if you've been vaccinated. And then we take another little break, and then we go to the second half, 2 hours of the documentary. Then we go to questions and answers. So I'm expecting this to go 6 to 7 hours, but it's going to be packed with information, good information. So give us a call and let's show up together. This is information you're not going to see anywhere else, because this involves people I've met or contacted all over the world. Good stuff coming at you. That's it today. It's important that the information you've seen today, heard today, and you can show the whole video because I own the copyright of the material, where normally when I'm doing a clip, I have to play the audio part of a clip from someone else because I don't have the copyright to show the actual video. But here, show it, share it, and let's start to work together to stop the corruption in science. Have a nice day, everyone. Again, the number is 877-627-5065.